Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining this study today in our Aramaic word study, continuing every week. And today we are in Acts chapter 1, verse 9, and we'll call it verse 9b, if you will. I hope you're enjoying this study. Again, the purpose of this is just to show you how beautiful God's word is that He has left for us to study and to dive into, and the richness and the depth of the understanding of the Aramaic and the Hebrew words. It just blows me away every time I open this up. I'm spending hours and could spend more, and I hope that you can pick up some of this passion, some of this excitement, and that it'll be a blessing to you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen today, and we'll get into our study. And what you're seeing here is, as you're used to by now, on the left side is a compilation of the verses that I put together in a PDF document. And then on the right side is the Dukrana analysis tool. And I have those hyperlinked in the PDF form. So want to look at this first part here, and we've spent time on this last week. And part B, where we're going to take up here, is it's again, the wording is very interesting, but between the four translations we're going to look at, they have: a cloud received him and he was covered from their eyes; a cloud received him and he was hidden from their eyes; a cloud received him and he was hidden from their sight; and a cloud received him out of their sight. So you could see the four different translations. Of course, three of them are taken from the Peshitta, Aramaic, Syriac text, and the King James is taken from the Greek translation. So again, what's the big deal? They all look pretty much, first gloss over, all looks pretty much like they're getting the same thing, a cloud covered, hidden in the clouds, and they saw it with their eyes. But again, things aren't always there the way they seem to be in a translation. So that's why we study, and we try to find out if there's anything that the Lord wants to show us. And again, remember, this is not a scholastic study. This is not intended to create a new Bible and a new doctrine or anything like that, but is for personal use of enrichment, and just to fall in love deeper with our God when we see what He has given to us and how He can share with us through His Word. That's the real purpose behind this. So as we look on the left side here, we see the um, Syriac Estrangelo font at the top. Then we see the Hebrew square script, somewhat modern script, and the pronunciation would go similar to this. Would be le, would be two, estalach would be to ascend, and then ve na, which is the word for cloud. So this word is talach. When you look at it, you might, those of you familiar with Hebrew, might hear a word of shalach, of sending, and that is a root word in here. And so the root word is to go and to send. But what's really neat here is we just look at the first um, depth, a study into the root word. We've clicked on the hyperlink, it takes us in. And what I like is this is, there's many different forms of this. This is has a little D underneath here, which indicates that it is in a intensive form, but the little P after it is to tell us that this is not intensive in a active form, but it's intensive in a passive form. And it's describing what is happening, but it's still giving us the indication is this was a very intense situation going on here. This was not just a, sit in your lazy boy recliner and press the buttons and watch what's going on the screen. This shook them, and so it's an intensive form, and it had that reaction on it. And so as we look here, we just see some of the general lexicon forms, but when we go to the intensive, what I really like here is this is also given the indication that it's not just ascending, but it's retracting the divine presence is what it has. And that just thrills me because obviously that's what has happened. And aligns with my thoughts and how I feel I'm interpreting these verses here as to being such a monumental occasion. Here, the divine presence was retracted. And so this next word we're going to look at is cloud. And of course, you think, well, what's the big deal? What's a cloud? How can clouds have anything new to tell me? What's that old Joni Mitchell song? I've looked at clouds from both sides now, and we're going to look at clouds from inside in unpacking the Aramaic language. And so we see the root here. We see a vav, which would be and at the beginning of the word, and then we look at the cloud, and of course it doesn't give us a whole lot. It does reference the cloud of glory, but what I start to get the impression here is that how we think about clouds today in 21st century Midwest may not be the same way as they thought about clouds in ancient Middle Eastern thought. So we're going to take a look at our friend Marcus Jastrow, and I've already took a look at um, looking this up so that we can get the clearest form um, of the software here, and it has a lot to say about clouds and trying to get an understanding of if we lived back then and we had no scientific background, we didn't watch the weatherman, we didn't know all the names of the different types of clouds, what would we think about clouds? And so we see Astros, which is based upon other extra biblical Aramaic texts where they reference these same words, gives us a little bit of understanding. This is known as protection. It's a covering. And so we see that thought process of things being covered, things being concealed. And let's look at the next page because we always like to look at things on either side of the word because they do enhance our understanding. And so we see they're talking about clouds and what the clouds do as they rumble and they cause rain. But I like the protection. Here, looking at it, it talks about clouds as cloud of divine presence. Okay, that takes us back to the time of the tabernacle, takes us back to the time dedication of Solomon's temple, when this cloud filled the house of the Lord and they recognized this divine presence. It also takes us back in thought to the Exodus and the covering of the cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, that God was in the cloud. And so, again, this was in their mindset. This was first and foremost. So the fact that this chapter and verse in Acts even mentions that he went up into a cloud, he could have vanished into a clear sky. He could have just vanished in front of them, and there would be no reference to a cloud being associated with this in any way. And so I think that the mentioning of the cloud definitely has to bring together the thought process of this divine presence in the cloud of the Exodus and in the cloud of the dedication of Solomon's temple, that this connection was not lost upon the disciples as they were standing there. So let's look to the next word here, and this is the word receive. It's kabelte. Kabelte. We did a study on this a while ago in one of the previous verses, so we won't look at it too much, but I want to point out here that all of these words are in the intensive form. They all have the little D in front of them. The word for receive is intensive, and it's in an active form, not in a passive form. But again, trying to create in our minds and then create a understanding that this was a very intensive experience they were going through here. This was had never been seen before. This is uh, just so intensive, and how it was reacting to them. How were they responding to this? I don't think I can emphasize that enough, and I try to think of that every time I see this intensive form underneath these words of what was really happening here. And so we have the word receive, but then we get to the next word, which is hide. And again, also in an intensive form. It is in a passive. So we're going to take a look at, just that word for hide here in the Dukrana. Um, comes up to cover, to conceal. Okay, we kind of get that in the intensive form. It also has about keeping information concealed. Uh, I guess that's something, obviously, it's associated with that, but could there be a meaning here that there's obviously a lot more to what's going to happen here than what the disciples knew. They were told just to go to Jerusalem and wait for the power to come from on high. So this whole situation, what was going to happen, was hidden from them. So even though Jesus was hidden, it doesn't say that he just disappeared. It says that this cloud blocked their ability to see him. They knew he was still there. How far did he have to go before their eyes couldn't see him anymore? Um, they obviously didn't have telescopes, and no one had thought to bring one along and kind of watch to see how far they could visualize here, because they didn't know what was going to be happening. The information was concealed from them as to totally what was going to be prepared for them. And so that's a neat little look into this. And then the last word I want to look at is the word for I, and it's ayin in Hebrew. We're very familiar with it. But I guess I was going to just pass over and say, oh, we're done with this verse. But I thought, no, I need to, just something prompted me that I need to take a look at this word I, and found that I didn't fully understand everything that was written, and all the meaning and the root behind this. And so as we look at this word I, what always struck me, even in studying Hebrew, is that this word I has two meanings right away. One is the eyeballs that's in our head, but then it's also the word for a spring. And that was really somewhat of a puzzle or enigma to me as to how to connect these two words. And so with that in mind, I just started looking up some different meanings here. And first of all, you'll notice that an I, and this is kind of interesting to point out a little bit of grammar here, the I is always feminine, and it's always plural, because they assume you have two eyes. And even so, this is always done in a pair. And you'll see numerous things in the scriptures. Ears are the same way. We have eyes. Anytime always understood that there's a pair of things, it's always in a plural, and usually always in a feminine form, even though it could be speaking of a man or a woman or an animal. It doesn't matter. It would be in a feminine form. And so that's just one of the nuances of Hebrew that we see also in the Aramaic. And so what we want to do here is take a look at yastros. Our root word here, we have an ayin, we have a yud, and then we have a final noon. So let's take a look in yastros and see what we have to see here. An ayin, we then go to we'll have to look here, is sometimes they substitute and have the yod and the vav being the same thing. So here they're going page 1054. We're on 1066. Let's just go back here a little bit. Okay, 1054. So what's interesting here is you see a number of places where we have these letters of the ayin and the vav and the final noon, the noon sofit. And so that is what you'll have to notice when you're looking up words, is if you don't find it, and it has a yod in it, look for a vav, because they can be used interchangeably. They're both known as vowel letters. So obviously the first part here we see down in the lower right corner, it talks about sight of the eye. Okay, nothing really new there, but let's look at the words on the other side of it that use the same root word. We see some very interesting things. We see that this is the root word for pleasure or enjoyment. It's the root word for circle. It's the root word for trouble and suffering. Okay, this is really interesting. Why are all these words being brought in? Also, it's a root word for misery and poverty, um, and destruction, punishment, and penalty. And so as I kind of pondered on this a little bit, it made me think of in the scriptures where it talks about that there is the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, basically the three categories that all types of sin boils down or can be refined into. And the lust of the eye, if you think of it, that what you see can also cause things to spring forth inside of you, and start to see a connection why spring and eye, or fountain and eye, were brought together. And look at these words here, the to watch or to guard. Yes, we have to watch with our eyes, but we also have to watch what our eyes see. We have to guard what our eyes see, because the eye gate, if you will, can cause pleasure. It can cause enjoyment. We also know that depending upon what we cast our eyes upon, can cause trouble, can cause suffering, can cause affliction. Um, Obviously, that affliction caused by our eyes, the trouble and suffering, can lead us to poverty if we allow it to take us in the wrong direction. And so I just was fascinated by this. Obviously, there's more we could talk about here, but I think this gives us enough food for thought as to what the eyes play in our life here, and how this fountain and eye are connected based upon what we allow to enter into our minds and our hearts through our eyes. And so with that, we're going to end our study for today. I pray that you are going to find a blessing in this, and that God will allow you to draw closer to Him, and that we can be thankful for all that God has done by giving us His precious word. So I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.